Last week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell mused about whether Mr. Trump will be in a position to lead the Republican Party into next year's elections and beyond. I want to submit that the time for such musing has passed. It's now time to begin a different set of conversations, a serious conversation about the impeachment and removal of President Trump. Now, this is not to say that it's definitely time for Congress to vote to impeach the president and for the Senate to vote to remove him. It is merely to ask this: whether, given everything Trump has done, said, tweeted, and frankly been since his inauguration, whether Congress has a duty as a body to think about its obligations with respect to the president as a function of the impeachment clauses of the Constitution. I want to submit that to ask that question is also to answer it. There are three basic areas that Congress should be thinking about in connection with an impeachment inquiry concerning Donald Trump. The first is his consistent abuses of power. His abuses of power with respect to his law enforcement apparatus, his abuses of power with respect to the self-enrichment that he and his family have been engaged in, his abuses of power with respect to horrific statements about individuals and allegations of crimes that he's levied against his predecessor and innocent other people. The second area are Trump's evident moral lapses, most recently his grotesque response to Charlottesville. It's hard to say what degree of moral lapse would constitute a basis for impeachment, but there is some limit that clearly does. For example, imagine if instead of merely attacking the press verbally, Trump actually called on people to commit acts of violence against members of the press and then showed up at one of their funerals and spat on his grave. Presumably that would be enough to justify impeachment. And the question, therefore, is where the line is. I think we're at least pretty close to it, and we may have crossed it. I think Congress should be thinking in those terms. Finally, Congress needs to think about aspects of Trump's behavior that constitute a frank abandonment of his office. The most pressing of these is his willful failure to fill key positions in his government, many of which not only do not have occupants, they don't have nominees to have occupants, but there are others, areas as well. For example, the political scientist Dan Dresner has documented nearly 80 instances in which Trump's senior advisors are quoted talking about him as though he were a toddler. And, talking about managing him the way you have to manage an infant. And my submission is that if that is the state of our engagement with the presidency, we need to be thinking about that in the language of impeachment. And there's a formal structure for that, and that is the convening of an impeachment inquiry by the House of Representatives in the House Judiciary Committee. Back in 1833, then Justice Joseph Story wrote of the impeachment clauses that impeachment is not limited to, quote, crimes of a strictly legal character, but also, quote, has a more enlarged operation and reaches what are aptly termed political offenses, growing out of personal misconduct or gross neglect or usurpation or habitual disregard of the public interests, various in their character and so indefinable in their actual involutions that it is almost impossible to provide systematically for them by positive law. That's the situation that we're dealing with now. The question of whether these inchoate offenses that Trump has committed against every expectation we have of the behavior of the presidency amounts to something that Congress would want to think about in light of impeachment.